Homa, Ngā Charlie Smith, Loci, Georgia Strait newspaper, and I'm the editor of the Georgia Strait newspaper, and I'm here to talk about the news of the week. And one of the big stories this week was the federal budget in Canada, and this is when the finance minister announces the annual spending for the year in Canada and where the money is coming from. So the finance minister of Canada, Jim Flaherty, this was his 8th budget since the Conservatives were elected in 2006, so he's quite experienced at bringing in budgets. And one of the things this budget has is a deficit of $18.7 billion. So for the year 2012-2013, the government ran a shortfall of $25.9 billion, and he says it will be reduced to $18.6 billion this year, and then $6.6 billion in 2014-2015. And then in the election year of the following year, he's forecasting an $800 million surplus. And this is all related to economic growth. The Prime Minister and the Finance Minister believe the economy will grow, and that will create more money coming into the Treasury. He did a few things in the budget this year. He eliminated the Canadian International Development Agency, which is an organization that provides aid to countries around the world and alleviating poverty. And so CIDA has now been folded into the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade. So now it's Foreign Affairs, International Trade, and International Development. Some of the groups that provide assistance to poor countries around the world have been critical of this decision because they say it will result in more emphasis on trade, less emphasis on helping the poor. The NDP has also been critical of this move, and they say it reflects the Prime Minister's emphasis on trade as opposed to aid. Another aspect of the budget was infrastructure spending, and it included $53.5 billion in spending over 10 years for provinces, territories, and municipalities for infrastructure. And one of the issues related to that is that Vancouver is in need of infrastructure, and by that term they mean things like sewage treatment plants, transit, roads, anything that can be used to help the municipal governments deal with providing the services that people want. The money that's coming in is a positive thing from the perspective of the municipalities, the Canadian Federation of Municipalities. However, they were looking for a lot more. They wanted $133 billion. One of the issues in Vancouver is transit, that there's very good transit service from Richmond to Vancouver, and that's the Canada Line. There's transit service through Burnaby on the Millennium Line and also on the Expo Line, but there isn't transit service along Broadway going to UBC that is like rapid transit. All you can do is take the bus. And the same in Surrey. They've got 4 stations in Surrey for the SkyTrain, but they want more transit, rapid transit going down King George Highway, down Fraser Highway to Langley, and also along 104 Avenue to Guildford. So one of the stories that we did this week in the Georgia Strait was about the debate over transit, and the mayors of Vancouver and Surrey both want rapid transit in their areas. One of the people supporting the mayor of Vancouver is the president of UBC, Stephen Toop. He has been making the case that if you build a subway to UBC, it will connect UBC to the Broadway corridor and Vancouver General Hospital and all of the opportunities for businesses in that area. There's been a significant amount of investment in the Broadway corridor, high-tech businesses, hospital-related businesses, and the president of UBC has been making the argument that if you build a subway, it will put Vancouver in a competitive position with other cities like Boston, like Toronto, like San Diego, which are all trying to attract investment in the high-tech and medical kind of sectors. And that debate is going to continue, and I think the big issue is going to be the provincial election and what happens there. In the meantime, Vancouver General Hospital, we have a story this week in our paper about infections in hospitals. And anyone who has visited a Canadian hospital will probably have seen all the signs by the elevators, at the entrances, wash your hands, wash your hands. And part of the reason is that in the world, one of the problems now is infections in hospitals. They're difficult to contain because the bacteria become resistant to antibiotics. So the drugs do not kill the bacteria, these antibiotic resistant. What's happened in Canada is there's been an increase. About 1 in 9 hospital patients is expected to get an infection. But what's been happening in Vancouver is they've been taking very aggressive steps to deal with this, and we have a better record in Vancouver than in the rest of the country. And actually, they're starting to reduce the number of hospital infections, and one of the reasons is washing hands. So they're telling people to wash their hands, and they have these alcohol-based hand sanitizers that are used to get people, all the health workers, and even the visitors to the patients. And one of the things the healthcare administrators, they want the patients to say if the healthcare workers are not washing their hands. They want the patients to notify officials if they see healthcare workers working on them, and that if they haven't washed their hands. So it's a very, very aggressive move that's being done here. Another story we have in our paper this week, which I found quite fun and interesting, was about the Chinoys. And the Chinoys are the people from the Philippines who are of Chinese descent. And many of you watching this will know that, the viewers of WOW TV, that there are a lot of people of Chinese descent all over Asia, the overseas Chinese. They're in Indonesia, they're in Malaysia, they were in Vietnam, they're in large numbers in the Philippines. And they've been very successful in other countries and in Canada as well, and the United States. So Carlito Pablo, who's one of our reporters, and he's Filipino, so he knows the Philippine community very, very well. And he came to me and he said, "Charlie, I'd like to do a story about the Chinoys." And I said, "Well, can you tell me about the Chinoys?" And he says, "These are people who are Filipino, but they're Chinese." And the word for Filipinos is Pinoy, is often used, but Chinoy is for the Chinese Filipinos. So he interviewed a few people. There's quite a community of people in Vancouver who are Filipino, but they're of Chinese descent. So they will speak Hokkien, or they'll speak Mandarin or Cantonese, but they also speak Tagalog, which is the language of the Philippines, and they also speak English because they're Canadian. So they're Chinese, Filipino, and Canadian, and one of them is seeking political office. And it's just a revealing insight into Vancouver. I've met people of Chinese descent who are from Peru, and they speak Spanish, and they have names like Juan and Carlos, and so you can get Chinese people. I've met a Chinese person from New Zealand. So the Chinese have gone around the world and often been very successful in many different countries. So some of them are coming to Vancouver, and they're not coming from China. They're not coming from Hong Kong. And they may not have even been born in Canada, but they're coming from countries like Peru and the Philippines. And we also have a large number of Chinese people in Canada who are from Vietnam, because many of them were the boat people who had to flee in the late 70s and early 80s. And some of those boat people, many of Chinese descent, were actually in refugee camps in Asia, but large numbers were invited to Canada, and they've helped build Canada. You can see the Vietnamese presence in Vancouver, particularly on Kingsway. There's quite a community of Vietnamese restaurants, and many of the Vietnamese are ethnically Vietnamese, but many are ethnically Chinese.